It was a quiet morning in early spring when the skies darkened. People on Earth first noticed the strange phenomena in the sky, a sudden, vast expanse of blackness blotting out the sun, accompanied by a series of unnerving, low-frequency vibrations that resonated through the air. Most thought it was a freak natural event, perhaps an unexpected cosmic anomaly. But then the ships appeared. The first fleet of Zorathi warships descended with terrifying precision, their massive, sleek forms casting eerie shadows over cities that had never known the true meaning of fear. These ships weren't just large. They were enormous, seemingly defying the laws of physics. Their hulls gleamed with an unknown metal, indestructible and impervious to anything humanity had ever developed. In mere moments, their advanced weaponry turned entire cities into smoldering ruins. The atmosphere was thick with a sense of despair as the world watched in horror. It didn't take long for humanity to realize this wasn't a normal invasion. These were not the ragtag forces of a typical alien species trying to colonize a new world. No, the Zorathi were unlike anything Earth had ever imagined. Their ships could launch devastating energy blasts from miles away, obliterating buildings and military bases without even a hint of effort. Their technology seemed to tap into unknown dimensions, a form of science so far beyond human comprehension that it rendered Earth's best weapons utterly useless. When the first Zorathi transmission was received, it only deepened the terror. The voice was cold, mechanical, and dispassionate. There was no diplomacy, no attempt at negotiation. They didn't demand resources, nor did they threaten humanity with violence. They simply stated their objective: submit or be destroyed. The world's leaders scrambled to respond, but the communication channels were jammed, and their military might seemed insignificant in the face of such overwhelming power. Every attempt to fight back failed miserably. Human missile systems shattered against the alien shields like raindrops hitting a stone wall. Fighter jets were reduced to burning wreckage the moment they crossed the Zorathi's path. Even nuclear weapons, Earth's last resort deterrent, were nothing more than a blip on the Zorathi's radar. In major cities like New York, Paris, Beijing, and London, panic spread like wildfire. Governments declared martial law, but it was clear that the very fabric of human civilization was unraveling. People ran through the streets in a frenzy, with no idea where to hide or how to fight back. The Zorathi ships hovered above these cities, their relentless bombardment reducing once proud metropolises to ash and rubble. All the while, the Zorathi's forces remained eerily silent. They made no further moves, no threats or demands. It was as if they were watching, studying. And then, after days of intense bombardment, the Zorathi made their true move. A single ship, larger than any that had arrived before, descended onto the surface of Earth. Its landing was an event of biblical proportions. Its impact caused a shockwave that tore through the atmosphere and shook the planet itself. As the dust settled, a door opened at the base of the ship. Out stepped a being unlike any human had seen before, tall, imposing, and exuding an unnatural aura of power. It was the first contact humanity had with the Zorathi, and it made the world's worst fears a painful, unavoidable reality. The aliens weren't here to negotiate. They were here to conquer, and Earth had no way to stop them. The days that followed the Zorathi invasion were a blur of chaos and fear. In the wake of their overwhelming assault, Earth's leaders were left stunned, paralyzed. Cities were in ruins. Entire populations had been wiped out in a matter of hours. The global economy collapsed as entire military forces were decimated in the blink of an eye. There was no power, no hope. Humanity had been shattered. What little remained of the world's governments met in secret, desperate to formulate a plan. The United Nations was long gone. Its headquarters destroyed along with the rest of New York City. National borders meant nothing anymore. The planet's best minds, scientists, military technicians, and engineers gathered in a hidden underground facility, the last place on Earth where any semblance of coordination could be found. Here, in the depths of desperation, Humanity's final resistance was born. Among them was Dr. Elias Ward, a renowned astrophysicist whose theories on alien life had made him an expert in extraterrestrial psychology. Ward had long warned the world of the possibility of invasion, but no one had taken him seriously. Now, standing in the cold concrete room filled with monitors and faintly flickering lights, he felt the weight of the moment. There was no time for theorizing anymore. Humanity's survival rested on their ability to act fast and think outside the box. "We have nothing left," Ward's voice echoed through the room. "But we still have our minds, and that may be our only advantage." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. Some were skeptical, but desperation had a way of silencing doubt. Ward had been studying the Zorathi's attacks, something no one else had dared to do. He believed they weren't invincible. Despite their unparalleled technology, their seemingly unshakable perfection, they had one weakness. They were entirely too reliant on their technology. In their mind, logic was infallible, and nothing beyond the cold equations of science could be allowed to threaten their supremacy. "We need to think differently. We can't match their power, but we might be able to exploit their arrogance," Ward continued, his mind racing. "If we can disrupt their systems, make them question their certainty, we might just get a foothold." The room hummed with disbelief at first, but soon the idea began to take root. A new strategy began to form, one that would not rely on brute strength, but on outthinking their alien invaders. Ward proposed creating a weapon, something that would target the Zorathi on a psychological level. It would exploit their greatest flaw, their unyielding belief in their superiority. By planting seeds of doubt in their minds, they might create cracks in their perfectly structured systems. The team worked around the clock, gathering all the data they could on the Zorathi. Intelligence came in from scattered resistance cells worldwide. Brave, desperate acts of defiance, small victories amid the devastation. Every scrap of information mattered. With Kale, the Zorathi defector, providing critical insights into their communication networks and behavior patterns, humanity's scientists and engineers began to devise the first psychological weapon ever conceived. But time was not on their side. The Zorathi were advancing, and their attacks grew more merciless with every passing day. They had left no room for negotiation, no room for error. If humanity did not act soon, there would be no planet left to save. Ward's team realized that the weapon they were developing was their last hope. There were no reinforcements coming. There would be no rescue. The human race had been brought to its knees. But in that moment of despair, something deeper stirred. Humanity's ingenuity, adaptability, and sheer will to survive were their most potent weapons. And so, against impossible odds, the resistance prepared for their first, uncertain strike. It would be a gamble, a long shot. But in the quiet chambers of the underground facility, hope burned brighter than ever before. Humanity's last stand had begun. The Resistance's underground facility had transformed into a beehive of activity, a frenetic space where time itself seemed to bend in the face of mounting pressure. As the team of scientists, engineers, and military tacticians worked around the clock, Dr. Elias Ward's theory began to take shape, slowly but surely. The Zorathi, seemingly unstoppable, were starting to show signs of vulnerability, though no one had expected it to come from such an unexpected source. Ward's breakthrough came on the fourth day of their research, when he made a startling connection. The Zorathi's technological superiority wasn't just their strength, it was also their weakness. The aliens' entire society and military apparatus were built around an unshakable belief in their own perfection. Their technology, while vast, was entirely formulaic, rigid, dependable, and predictable. The Zorathi operated according to strict rules, with no room for improvisation or deviation. In their minds, logic ruled all, and their systems were flawless, never requiring adjustment. But humanity's greatest strength was their ability to adapt. Ward realized that if they could introduce even the smallest amount of chaos into the Zorathi's flawlessly executed plans, it might send them into a tailspin of confusion. by creating a force that disrupted their neural communication and internal systems, something unpredictable, something irrational. Humanity could exploit this rigid structure and turn it into their advantage. The more Ward delved into the data, the more certain he became. The Zorathi had no tolerance for anything outside their perfect calculations. They were so reliant on their cold, logical superiority that they couldn't comprehend the human ability to think outside the box. Even the smallest disruption in their understanding of the universe could cause a breakdown, a crack in their seemingly invincible armor. With this revelation, the Resistance pushed forward, putting all of their resources into developing the psychological weapon Ward had proposed. It wasn't a physical bomb or energy pulse. Instead, they needed to craft something much more subtle, a program capable of transmitting data into the Zorathi's neural network, designed to cause uncertainty, fear, and above all, doubt. Days turned into nights as the weapon took shape, but there were still so many unknowns. The Zorathi's neural communication systems were a mystery to the human engineers, an alien construct that they could barely begin to understand. Even Kale, the defector who had been invaluable in providing insights into the Zorathi's behavior, struggled to explain their most basic systems. The Zorathi were a collective species, their consciousness connected across vast distances through a highly advanced network the humans could barely interface with. Breaking that system would require more than just a clever trick. It would take a profound understanding of the alien psyche. In the midst of their growing success, a new problem emerged. The Zorathi were beginning to notice the Resistance's movements. They had detected the human attempts to analyze and counter their operations, and their response was swift. Within days of Ward's revelation, Zorathi warships began to orbit Earth in greater numbers, their massive forms eclipsing the sun like harbingers of doom. Humanity's time was running out. The pressure on the Resistance grew unbearable. But then, the first flicker of hope arrived in the most unexpected of places. A message from Kale. He had located a vulnerability in the Zorathi's primary communication hub, a gateway that could potentially allow the Resistance to infiltrate their mental network. It was risky, almost suicidal, but Kale believed they could target it with the psychological weapon they had developed. Ward looked over the team assembled in the dimly lit command room. Sweat was visible on every face, and exhaustion weighed heavily on their shoulders. But there was something else too, something that hadn't been there before. It was the spark of belief. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give the team hope. The Zorathi might be perfect in their eyes, but humanity was about to show them just how imperfect perfection could be. "We might actually have a chance," Ward said, his voice low but steady. "This is our moment. We take it or we die." With Kale's information and their psychological weapon ready, humanity was about to make its move. The Zorathi's overconfidence in their perfection would soon be their greatest downfall. Just as humanity was preparing for their most daring strike against the Zorathi, a new and unexpected development threw everything into question. The Resistance had been operating in secrecy for weeks, crafting their psychological weapon and preparing their final assault. But the risk of failure still loomed large. The odds were still stacked against them. Then came the message. It arrived in the dead of night, encoded in a series of strange symbols that no one had seen before. The Resistance's communication team worked tirelessly to decrypt it, and what they uncovered sent chills through everyone who read it. A Zorathi defector had made contact. Kale. His name came through the static like a whisper in the wind. He identified himself as an officer within the Zorathi ranks, one who had grown disillusioned with the relentless conquest of other species. He claimed that he was defecting not out of self-preservation, but because he believed humanity's survival could be the key to saving his own species from destruction. The Zorathi, he warned, were on the brink of self-destruction, and their current path of conquest would eventually lead them to ruin. Kale was willing to help humanity if they could offer him sanctuary. The message was met with immediate skepticism. How could they trust a Zorathi? The alien race had shown no mercy and had decimated Earth without hesitation. The thought of letting a member of that race into their ranks was almost unthinkable. But Kel's message was clear, and his offer was too valuable to dismiss without consideration. He had access to vital intelligence, information that could allow humanity to bypass the impenetrable Zorathi communication systems, information that might enable them to launch a counterattack on their homeworld. In a tense meeting among the highest-ranking members of the Resistance, the question of trust was debated. Some were vehemently opposed to the idea, fearing that Kel was a trap, sent to infiltrate and sabotage humanity's efforts. Others were more open to the possibility, recognizing that their time was running out and that they couldn't afford to turn away a potential ally. Dr. Elias Ward, who had been cautiously optimistic about the defector from the beginning, stood firm in his belief that Kel could be trusted. "We don't have the luxury of time," Ward said, his voice hard. "If there's even the slightest chance this man is telling the truth, we need to take it. The Zorathi are too advanced for us to fight alone. But with their knowledge on our side, we could stand a chance." The decision was made. Kel's message was authenticated through encrypted channels, and the location for the meeting was set. It was a risky maneuver, but the desperate need for information left them with little choice. In the dead of night, Kel was smuggled into one of the Resistance's safe houses, a hidden base far from the alien warship's reach. Kel arrived in a tattered cloak, his alien features barely visible under the dark fabric. His presence was unsettling, and the tension in the room was palpable as the Resistance leaders studied him. But despite his alien nature, there was a certain humanity in his eyes, something that couldn't be denied. He spoke of his former comrades, the Zorathi elite, who were beginning to question the Empire's goals. He revealed that cracks were beginning to form in the once unified Zorathi collective consciousness. "We've gone too far," Kel confessed, his voice trembling with emotion. "We believed our perfection would last forever, but we are lost. You have a chance, but you must act quickly." The information Kel provided was invaluable. With his help, humanity could now penetrate the Zorathi's communication network, an advantage that might turn the tide of the war. But as the meeting came to a close, Kel's words weighed heavily on everyone in the room. The Zorathi would not forgive him for his betrayal. He would be hunted, and if the humans failed, the Zorathi would destroy them both. As Kel prepared to leave the meeting, one final question hung in the air. Could humanity afford to trust a member of the race that had caused them so much suffering? Or had the Zorathi's arrogance truly led them to the brink of their own destruction? Only time would tell. With Kel's invaluable intel, the Resistance accelerated their efforts to develop the ultimate weapon, one that could turn the tide of the war and give humanity a fighting chance against the Zorathi. They had no illusions that they could match the Zorathi's technological superiority. However, the psychological weapon they now set their sights on was something entirely new. It was a calculated gamble, one that, if successful, could exploit the very core of the Zorathi's fatal flaw, their rigid belief in their own perfection. The weapon, still in its early stages of development, was complex, requiring a blend of human ingenuity, alien technology, and a deep understanding of Zorathi neural networks. The key to success lay in using their vast communication system against them, a highly intricate network that linked the minds of every Zorathi across their empire. Humanity's researchers were racing against time, working in secret laboratories and underground facilities, their every move watched closely by Zorathi forces orbiting above Earth. Dr. Elias Ward spearheaded the project, utilizing Kel's insights into the Zorathi's inner workings. The alien defector had provided them with detailed maps of their communication hubs and even offered schematics of their neural interfaces. Ward and his team's task was clear. They needed to find a way to inject a surge of chaos, something that would overwhelm the Zorathi's logical systems, cause a glitch in their otherwise seamless coordination, and bring the alien empire to its knees. The team worked tirelessly, days blurring into nights, as they built a device capable of hacking into the Zorathi's communication infrastructure. It wasn't a traditional weapon. It wasn't a bomb or a missile, but a computer program, a virus that could infiltrate the Zorathi network and spread doubt through their ranks. The weapon would project false signals, twisted images, and paradoxical data that would confuse the Zorathi's collective consciousness. Fear, confusion, and uncertainty, the very antithesis of their perfection, would spread like a disease. However, there was a massive hurdle. The Zorathi's neural network was impenetrable to human technology. The program had to be fine-tuned to match the frequency and complexity of the Zorathi mind, and that's where the real challenge lay. Despite Kel's knowledge, no one on Earth had any direct experience with their cognitive systems. The Resistance's best minds were at a loss. But then, Kel made another bold offer, one that shook everyone in the room. He volunteered to act as a conduit, linking his own mind to the weapon. The Zorathi are connected through the neural network, Kel explained quietly, his voice betraying the weight of his decision. I can bridge the gap between your technology and the system itself. I'll serve as a relay, a direct link. My brain is still attuned to their frequencies. It was a terrifying idea. Kel would essentially risk his life, exposing himself to the very system that could destroy him. But his willingness to sacrifice everything gave the Resistance hope. He understood the Zorathi systems better than any human ever could. And with his help, they would be able to slip past their defenses. As Kel prepared for his mind to be linked to the weapon, the atmosphere in the lab grew heavy with tension. The team was well aware that they had one shot at this. If they failed, the Zorathi would crush them, and Kel would likely never survive the process. The device, a complicated mass of wires and alien technology, hummed with energy as the Resistance initiated the connection. "Are you ready?" Ward asked, his voice steady despite the stakes. Kel nodded, a mixture of determination and fear in his eyes. There is no other choice. With a deep breath, Kel allowed himself to be connected to the neural interface, his mind linking with the device. As the process began, the room fell into an eerie silence. Ward and his team could only watch, praying that their trust in Kel wouldn't be misplaced. Seconds stretched into minutes. Sweat beaded on Kel's forehead as his body tensed under the strain of the connection. Then suddenly, the interface began to pulse with activity. The virus was ready. The weapon was operational. The Resistance had one last chance. It was all or nothing. Humanity's ultimate weapon, crafted with the help of a Zorathi defector, was ready to be unleashed. The room was suffused with a tense silence as the countdown began. Kel was connected to the neural interface, his body rigid with the effort of holding the connection. On the monitors, the Resistance's technicians observed the data, their fingers hovering over their controls, ready to act the moment Kel gave the signal. "We're in." Kel's voice broke the silence, shaky but clear. His breath came in short, labored gasps. The strain of linking his mind with the weapon was beginning to take its toll, but the urgency of the mission was far greater than any personal discomfort. "I'm interfacing with their network. I'm seeing their communications. Everything." Ward glanced at the digital readouts, his heart racing as the first bits of data flooded in. It was almost too much to process. The Zorathi's neural network was vast, stretching across galaxies, linking the minds of millions of individuals, but there was no turning back. They had come too far. With Kel's help, the virus they had developed, designed to trigger chaos, confusion, and doubt within the Zorathi collective, was now ready to deploy. But they needed to be precise. The slightest error could expose their plan, and with the Zorathi ships already circling Earth, they didn't have the luxury of failure. Initiating now, Kel's voice came through the comm system, calm but strained. He wasn't just piloting a machine. He was physically and mentally linking with the Zorathi consciousness. Every fiber of his being was now part of that network. Kel's mind surged into the Zorathi's communication grid, and as he did, the virus began to spread. It infiltrated the neural pathways, cloaking itself beneath layers of code, before releasing its deadly payload. First came a flicker, A ripple of static that shivered through the network like the first crack in a glass. Then the virus erupted, sending a wave of confusion through the once orderly system. "Something's wrong," Cale said, his voice shaking. "Their communication channels are fragmenting. They're fighting it. They can feel the disruption." Ward's fingers flew over the controls, working to amplify the virus's signal. "We've got to push harder," he urged. "If we stop now, they'll recover." The team held their breath as Cale pushed deeper into the Zorathi's collective mind, the Resistance's weapon amplifying with each passing second. The once flawless system of coordination now began to fray as logical gaps and impossible contradictions multiplied. Images of their greatest fears, visions of failure, images of their own soldiers turning against them, flashed through the Zorathi's minds. A cacophony of irrational thoughts and fleeting doubts took hold. The Zorathi weren't accustomed to failure. They had been bred for perfection, a race designed to be the pinnacle of order and control. Now, in their most sacred neural networks, they were beginning to feel uncertainty, panic, chaos. Words that had no meaning to their culture now reverberated through the minds of every Zorathi soldier. "We've done it," Cale gasped, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "They're breaking down. They're questioning their own strategy. The network's unstable." Ward could hardly believe what he was hearing. The virus was working. The Zorathi, who had so arrogantly believed in their superiority, were now beginning to fall victim to the very thing they had never expected: doubt. But even as the first cracks appeared in their collective consciousness, the Zorathi retaliated. Ward's eyes widened as their fleet responded. An enormous surge of energy rippled through the atmosphere, a pulse of destructive power aimed directly at their location. The Zorathi were fighting back with everything they had. "It's not over yet," Cale's voice trembled. "They're launching an assault. They know we're doing this. They'll stop us if we don't finish it now." The room fell into a frantic frenzy as the Resistance scrambled to maintain the link. Cale's body was beginning to tremble violently from the strain. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. He was giving everything to this mission, but the toll it was taking on him was becoming clear. "Hold steady," Ward shouted, his heart pounding. "Just a little longer. We're almost through." The network was beginning to collapse. The Zorathi were no longer acting with the precision and unity they had once displayed. Ships in orbit began to lose communication, disoriented and confused, unable to follow their commander's orders. And then it happened. A critical breach. The first Zorathi warship fell silent, its systems completely shut down. Then another. The once mighty fleet that had ravaged Earth's cities began to falter, one by one. Humanity had taken the first step in breaking the Zorathi's seemingly indomitable power. The initial success was a rush of adrenaline, an explosion of hope that surged through the Resistance's ranks. Humanity's psychological weapon had worked. The Zorathi, so certain of their superiority, were now floundering, their once perfect coordination shattered. Entire fleets drifted aimlessly in space, their systems fried, their commanders lost in the chaos of uncertainty. It was the first crack in the Zorathi Empire, a victory humanity could scarcely believe. But the respite was short-lived. As the team celebrated their success, a darker realization began to settle in. The Zorathi might have been shaken, but they weren't defeated. No alien empire, no matter how reliant on their systems, would go down without a fight. The Zorathi were about to retaliate, and this time, they would not be caught off guard. "We've bought ourselves some time," Dr. Elias Ward said, his voice low but steady. "But this won't last. They'll adapt. We've only disrupted their communication systems. They still have the might to crush us." He was right. As the first Zorathi warships began to power back on, their reactivation was swift and brutal. The initial confusion gave way to an eruption of fury. Warships that had been adrift now turned toward Earth, their weapons systems re-engaged. Zorathi fighters swarmed back into formation, and their massive motherships began a descent toward the planet, each one brimming with destructive power. "They're coming for us." Kel's voice broke through the comm system, barely audible but tinged with a hint of both fear and resolve. The strain of the link had drained him, but he had been invaluable. His sacrifice had given humanity a chance, but he knew, just as Ward did, that it might not be enough. The resistance scrambled to prepare for the Zorathi's counterattack. The underground facility buzzed with the frantic activity of soldiers and technicians, working to fortify defenses and prepare for an all-out assault. Humanity had no choice but to face the enemy head-on, with the few weapons they had left. They'd taken down the Zorathi's communication network, but the war was far from over. Outside the facility, the skies were already darkened by the silhouettes of incoming Zorathi ships. The planetary defense systems, those few remaining after the initial attack, had been reactivated, but they were barely enough to hold off the sheer might of the Zorathi. The first wave of enemy forces descended, unleashing a devastating barrage of energy blasts that struck Earth's surface. The shockwaves rattled buildings, and the atmosphere itself seemed to tremble. "They're targeting the major cities," Ward muttered as he watched the satellite feeds. "If we don't stop them now, there won't be anything left to save." But as the first Zorathi weapons began to hit their targets, something remarkable happened. The remaining human forces, those who had survived the initial onslaught, rallied. In cities and hidden bunkers around the world, humanity fought back with an intensity the Zorathi hadn't anticipated. The resistance wasn't just trying to survive. They were determined to make their stand. "We can't let them take everything." A voice on the comm line crackled. It was Captain Alana Briggs, a leader of one of the last human militias. "We've got one last chance. We fight for every inch of this planet." And so, humanity fought. They fought with everything they had left. Every scrap of technology, every ounce of courage. Small units of resistance soldiers, equipped with whatever weapons they had scavenged, launched guerrilla strikes against Zorathi landing forces. Cities were reduced to rubble, but in every corner of Earth, pockets of human defiance emerged, each one more determined than the last. Ward stood before the massive screens of the operations room, watching as the battle raged on across the globe. The fight was far from over, but the resistance had learned something crucial from their early success. The Zorathi had weaknesses, and if humanity could exploit them just a little longer, they might stand a chance of winning this war. "It's not over yet," Ward said, his voice hard with determination. "We've just started. They've given us a chance, and we won't waste it." And so, despite the overwhelming odds and the destruction raining down from above, humanity's will to fight only grew stronger. The battle for Earth had entered a new phase, one where every victory mattered more than ever. The Zorathi had launched their full-scale retaliation, but humanity was not backing down. The final battle for Earth had begun. What the Zorathi hadn't anticipated was the sheer force of human resolve. Despite the overwhelming odds, the resistance held firm, fighting on against an alien empire that had once believed it was invincible. The sky above Earth had become a battleground. Zorathi ships, massive and terrifying, dropped through the atmosphere, raining fire upon humanity's last strongholds. But it wasn't just the humans fighting with their weapons. It was their spirit, their refusal to surrender, that began to turn the tide. They fought with everything, every last drop of their strength, every ounce of ingenuity. The same people who had been terrified in the beginning were now a force to be reckoned with. Ward and Kale, though exhausted, were at the heart of the battle. The Zorathi were still reeling from the disruption in their neural network, but they were regrouping, adapting quickly. It was clear that the aliens were pushing hard to crush humanity once and for all. But humanity was fighting for its survival, and this was their home. "We've bought ourselves time, but not much more," Ward said, watching the battle unfold across multiple screens. "They'll adapt soon. If we don't act now, we won't get another chance." Kale, still recovering from the mental strain of linking his mind to the Zorathi network, turned to Ward. His face was gaunt, but his determination hadn't wavered. "We need one last strike," he said. "There's a command center in their mothership, the source of their command and control. If we hit that, we can cripple them for good. I know their systems better than anyone. I can get us there." It was a desperate plan, and it carried unimaginable risk. The Zorathi mothership was heavily fortified, surrounded by fleets of warriors and heavily armed battle stations. Getting close to it would be suicide. But this was humanity's last chance. Ward turned to the others in the room. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, all of them ready to follow him into the heart of the storm. "This is it," he said, his voice resolute. "We fight together. We take down their command. We make sure they can never recover." The final assault was launched with the full might of humanity's remaining forces. A small fleet of resistance fighters, led by Kale, broke through the Zorathi defenses, using a combination of guerrilla tactics and the chaos within the Zorathi network. With Kale's guidance, they were able to exploit the weaknesses in the mothership's systems, infiltrating its defenses just long enough to create a breach. As Kal's small squad infiltrated the heart of the Zorathi command center, the resistance fighters found themselves face to face with the most terrifying enemy force they had ever encountered. But humanity was different now. They no longer fought with fear, but with pure, unyielding resolve. In those final moments, they became something far more dangerous than the Zorathi had ever imagined. The command center, once a symbol of invulnerability, was now a beacon of hope for humanity. The resistance soldiers, using a combination of advanced technology and raw human ingenuity, planted explosives throughout the core systems. The countdown began. As the timer ticked down, the Zorathi realized too late that their own superiority had been their downfall. The virus had been the catalyst. Humanity had found their weakness, and now it was their turn to strike. The Zorathi mothership began to implode, and with it, the entire fleet. The explosion sent a shockwave across the planet, shaking the Earth itself. For a brief moment, everything seemed still. And then, in the distance, the first rays of sunlight broke through the chaos. Humanity had won. The battle was over. The Zorathi had been defeated. Though the cost had been high, many lives lost, entire cities destroyed, the triumph was undeniable. The resistance had taken down an empire, not with brute force, but with their ingenuity, their adaptability, and most of all, their unbreakable spirit. Kale stood at the ruins of the Zorathi mothership, his heart heavy but proud. He had helped lead humanity to victory, but the scars of this war would last forever. As the survivors of the resistance gathered, they shared a quiet moment of victory, a moment that spoke of sacrifice, of unity, and of the undeniable strength that lay in their humanity. Earth was scared, but it was free. Humanity had not only survived, they had proven that, in the face of the impossible, they could rise up and defeat even the most powerful of foes.